Morning all, and welcome to LoveWorkLife Consulting 60-Minute Mentor. Welcome back to this week's webinar. I hope everyone's happy, fit and well this Tuesday morning. If you can hear us, please drop a quick note into the chat room or the question box. We've got an action-packed session today, so we'll wait for people to come in. I'd like to, as people are coming in, thank everyone for the questions that you've sent through. What we want to try and do today, although we might not be answering a lot of the questions directly, we're going to try cover off most of the questions in the discussion topic. But if you feel there's something that is really important to you, or there's something that you really want to ask us and get out in the open, then feel free to put your hand up or send a question through, and we'll do our best endeavors to answer those questions. I think to kick the session off, Paul, as people have started to come in, as I said, we've got an awful lot to talk about today with regards to mentoring and coaching and things like that. And I think that's the first thing that we sort of need to touch on a little bit is what we want to try and do is separate very much the difference between mentoring and management throughout this whole webinar. And we want to cover that quite heavily. Management is all about instructing, telling, to a certain degree, leading people, when mentoring is all about developing the person to actually develop themselves and manage themselves in a better way to become a better person overall. And there's a very, very different thing in the way that happens and the way that works. So the first thing I want to talk about, Paul, is when we sort of look at this thing, I want to talk about the mindset and understanding the mindset of the mentor, but also understanding the mindset of the mentee.
Well, thanks, Howard. Morning, everybody. I hope you're all really well. It's a really beautiful day here in London town. Very sunny, beautiful day. So let's get into this. I think, firstly, mentoring is something that Howard and I do professionally, have done for many, many years. And it gives, I think, for the mentor, a sense of reward that is very significantly different from managing people. So I think there is a difference between managing and mentoring. There are nuances, but the major difference is that when you manage people, as you'll be aware, you are in a position of authority. You have an opportunity to, if you want to tell people to do things, you have the opportunity to direct very firmly. Mentoring is very different. Mentoring is all about supporting. It's about encouraging. It's about, I suppose, empowering people. And it's most definitely about listening. It's certainly not, as a mentor, about you. It's absolutely about the mentee. It's about them. And it's entirely around, from your point of view as a mentor, getting that individual, that person you're mentoring, to open up, to talk to you, to feel comfortable in your presence, to be able to speak to you their innermost feelings and thoughts, their concerns and fears, knowing that it's a safe place, that you are not going to leave the room at any stage and repeat the stories you've heard to anybody else. So it's very much built upon trust, and that trust, that environment that you need to build with that person comes from you. And once you've gained that trust, you must look after it as a valuable thing, because if you abuse it, then you've abused it forever. You will never get the trust back. So mentoring is all about encouraging people to trust you, to listen to you, but mostly it's about you giving of yourself to that individual. And we're going to go through that in great detail on how you do that, and getting them to really articulate their concerns and fears, and to confide in you and lean on your knowledge and experience.
So it's quite interesting, as we said that, Paul. You know, I remember being a manager and leading businesses, and I remember being invited into the Adecco mentoring scheme, and we went through a long training course to become mentors, but at the same time we were being mentored as well. So I had a mentor from a different country, from a different part of Adecco, helping me as a director grow, and I was mentoring different people within the Adecco group. And I think the thing that is very, very different to separate from a manager is when you're managing people, that telling people and directing people what to do is your job, and your results are based around what you're working with them and helping them. When you're mentoring someone, it's about that individual, and it's very hard to then separate, if you're managing a person, to truly mentor a person that you've got under your management ship. So I always think if you're going to sort of set up a mentoring program, you've got to make sure that you set up a program that gives people access to people that they don't normally deal with and don't normally speak with, that can give them a different perspective. And as you said, that safe haven of they are quite happy to give warts and all from a mentee's point of view. And we'll talk about this later on, but a brief snippet is, as a mentor, I had to work harder on that person to gain their trust, gain their absolute understanding that whatever's said between the four walls or over a telephone line with that person would not go anywhere else, and certainly would not go back to their manager or their directors. It was all about them. So it's a very interesting sort of position to be a mentor or a manager. There are a lot of things that a mentor does that I think on the outside a manager should adopt, and what a manager can adopt to help develop their staff. But a true mentor is very, very different on that thing. But it's not saying that the lines are blurred. And I think we've got to think about some of those lines, because obviously you could be a business here with one or two people in, so setting up a true mentor session series might be very hard unless you go externally. But you might be a business with 5 or 6 people where you can set genuine mentors up within the business and work on that. But people have to understand the intricacies of setting up that program and how that program works. So to me, managing and mentoring is very, very different, but there's lots of aspects of the mentoring role that managers should undertake. So if we looked at that, and looked at it in the true way, what's in it for the manager? What's in it for the mentor, and what's in it for the mentee?
Just to pick up on a point you've made, Howard, just before I get to that point, I think if you're looking to set up a mentoring program in your business, one of the things that you need to think through is who mentors who. So firstly, don't come into this thinking you as a manager, as an owner, have to mentor everybody. That would be entirely incorrect. You make a really good point. Very often the mentor to the mentee is not that person's boss. In fact, it's nearly always the case that it's somebody neutral. And we have set up, as you know, Howard, mentor schemes in businesses where we've matched people throughout the organization at different levels. So it's not entirely impossible, for example, that a newbie in your business, somebody fairly new, is teamed up with somebody that 12 months ago was also fairly new. Because their relevant experience to that individual is something that has resonance to the new person. So mentoring doesn't come directly from you. And actually, in many respects, although it's often the case you will mentor somebody close to you, if you can avoid mentoring directly your own reports, that can be very, very helpful. And certainly you and I have worked, and we continue to work in businesses to this day, where we mentor the direct reports of the owners. And I know the owners find that incredibly important, because they open up to us. They tell us things that they wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable talking to their bosses about. And I mean, and and I know that we often get used as a conduit in that situation. You find yourself saying to the individual, you're telling me something that is important to you. Do you want me? Because this is an important point. You need to seek permission from the mentee to use information. You can't give that information to anybody in the business unless you have permission. Otherwise, you break the trust. So you have to ask, do you want me to mention this particular situation to your boss. And very often, as you know, Howard, we get told that would be really helpful. So we get used as a conduit. It's very useful in that sense. But I think, setting up that mentoring system is a very important one. What's in it for mentors is a very important question. So firstly, I don't think everybody is capable or wants to be a mentor. Let's be really clear about that. In much the same way, you might argue that not everybody wants to be a manager. Some people are perfectly comfortable and happy doing their own thing, keeping to themselves, call it what you will, being self-centered, if that's the expression. They're just not keen to share. We all know people like that. We all work with people like that, and that's fine. It's okay. Not everybody wants to share. Not everybody wants to give. And mentoring is about that. It's very specific. It is about you giving of yourself, your knowledge, your experience, your abilities, your time to an individual with not a lot in it for you, frankly. There's nothing in it for you. I mean, you are not going to benefit financially. Typically, as you said earlier, if you are mentoring somebody else in the business that doesn't report to you, it's not necessarily the case that you will receive some financial reward. You certainly won't get additional salary to do it. You shouldn't in any case. It won't necessarily affect your bonus. It might affect the profitability of the business in the sense, positively, that your input helps that person perform better. But that isn't why you do it. You do it because you want to see that individual grow. You feel empathy towards that person. You want to support and assist them. And I think this is something I always say to managers, and this is where there's a crossover. You want to be a teacher. And that seems like a fairly shallow word, but I think it's a very profound word. And it is teaching, it is listening and passing on knowledge, passing on experience. But you can only do that from the perspective of, and you used the expression in the promo stuff earlier this week, Howard, having bought the t-shirt. People will listen to you and take your advice if they recognize that you have the experience, you've been there, you've had the bruises, you've lived through similar experiences, and you can pass on your knowledge, you can pass on your experiences, your case studies to that person. That gives you credibility. But this is not about you as a mentor. It's never about you. It's absolutely about that person. And you have to be dedicated to that individual and believe passionately in assisting and supporting that person.
I think it's really interesting. I think when I sort of started to understand, and this is a bit about our why more than anything else, it is about helping that person become the best person they can be. And I look at it from a personal point of view and from a work point of view, and I'll give you a personal perspective on this. As an ex, and I always say ex, I don't know why, an ex elite athlete, I now train and coach people outside of work in a sporting environment. And people always think, why aren't you training and coaching with the people who are also elite athletes? Because that's not really what floats my boat. It doesn't really get my juices flowing. And I had a situation about 4 years ago where a young lady came to martial arts, and her mother took me to one side and said she's watched me being physically abused by my ex-partner. She's been physically abused herself, and she's now an elective mute and doesn't speak to anybody. She doesn't like any physical contact. She doesn't like anyone in her personal space. And I thought that's going to be quite difficult from a martial arts point of view to coach and train someone to this, to what she wants to be. And I made it a personal mission to get her to speak and work. And it took me 2.5 years to finally get this girl to have a full conversation with me and to get to a point where she could take physical contact, grade with other people. And it was quite interesting. It was the joy of watching her come out and actually cry in front of her mother and go, I've done something that I never thought I'd be able to do. And that, to me, is what a mentor is about. It's about releasing that inner person that can really excel and helping them to do that properly. And I think from a mentee's point of view, I remember being a mentee on programs, and I was being mentored by one of the heads of on Via Deco board. And it was very interesting that I felt that trying to pick someone's brain was very interesting for me. What in it for me was it lifted my spirit. It gave me an idea that someone actually cared about my future, and somebody was interested in helping me to better myself. And it wasn't about bettering the company, it was about bettering myself. And it gave me that view that if people are willing to invest their time in me, and it was an hour a month, it was only an hour a month, and I could take what I learned from them to better myself, then I had to really invest in that. And it was the way that it was presented and the way that the mentor presented themselves to me that made me really sort of start to open up. And it was that sort of linked into that sort of trust aspect of mentoring. And working forward from there. So I think as a mentor, it is very much about having that internal why. Why do you want to be a mentor? And I think when you talk about selecting mentors in your business, you've got to look at those people who are willing to give themselves to the mentee, and give everything to get that person over the line of where they want to be. It's not about them. It's not about you, sorry, it's all about them. And then as a mentor, it is all about making sure that when you present yourself to the mentee, that they feel that they have their best interest at heart, and that they feel safe within that environment to actually deliver, what you're going to talk to them about. And I think there's an awful lot that we can talk about that. So that being patient, being supportive, non-judgmental are all really important things when we talk about what's in it for me, because that's what's in it for both parties at the end of the day. And
Howard, just to add to that, I think this is to your point that anybody being a mentor has to be authentic. You can't fake it. You can't fake interest in somebody. If you do, you try and fake it, people see straight through you. So, you need to be authentic yourself. You need to be genuinely interested in that person, or the people that you appoint to be mentors have to be, to your point, they have to want to do it. They have to be authentic and passionate about their mentee's success. You have to also be there for them because, you and I mentor a lot of people, and over the years I've mentored hundreds of people. Their success, if you like, is what you are you're focused about. What's really interesting is that we do this from a business perspective. We sit with people. Generally, I do about an hour and a half mentoring in a session with somebody. That's enough time. You start on time, you finish on time, and you don't allow anybody to interrupt you. No phones, no interruptions. You're focused entirely on that person in a quiet place so you can sit and talk and listen. And I think they will often, if you're mentoring correctly, if you're asking the right questions, you will find out a huge amount about that person. And over the years, and it's a privilege really, people have really opened up to me about their personal lives, what's going on at home, their pasts, their childhood, all sorts of things come out. And yet, you start from the perspective of wanting to help them at work. And yet, as you progress and they really lean into you and trust you, they'll start to open up about a whole range of things that are really not directly related to work, but obviously have an impact, and certainly have an impact on their psychology, on their mental well-being. And frankly, in order to understand how to guide people, you do need to truly understand their mentality, who they are, where they've come from in life, what's brought them to this point, their motivation, their drivers, all those things that aren't visible from the exterior, you need to find out. And if you ask the right questions and you compose the sessions correctly, people will naturally open up to you. And when you have that, trust me, and I know you feel the same way, Howard, it is a major there is a major sense of achievement, and it is a privilege. It's a privilege for people to open up and tell you their innermost secrets and thoughts. And if they're going to do that, you need to treasure those conversations, treat them with respect, be listening, and you used a very good phrase, Howard, be non-judgmental. You have to walk in somebody's shoes to understand the way they think. So you need to be able to do that. Personally, I've taken enormous pleasure over the years from the success of people I've mentored. Sometimes, actually quite often, they'll say, thank you, Paul, or thank you, Howard. I couldn't have done it without you, or I did exactly what we talked about last time round and brilliant, it worked for me. Sometimes it'll be that direct and it's a great feeling. Sometimes they'll talk about things that they did without mentioning that you suggested they did it, but you recognize from their description that what they've done, the way they've acted or what they've said has come directly from you. And there's a really, again, a strong sense of feeling that you've made a big contribution to their lives. I mean, I'm not trying to blow smoke up my own thing, but I had a LinkedIn message from somebody that worked for me 20 odd years ago, about 4 weeks back. I won't mention her name, but she said, when people ask me today, who's inspired me the most in my professional life, I tell them it's you. And I was really, I mean, I felt really emotional about that. I haven't seen her for so many years, and yet she said that about me. And I think that mentoring is all about that. It's about passing on, looking after people. It's not financial reward, but what she said, those kind of words that she passed on to me meant more to me, frankly, than virtually anything else. It's the legacy you leave with people. It's the support you give them. And right back to the early point, don't ask or demand people mentor. Ask them to do it if they want to. Ask them if they want to give of themselves. And if they do that, it creates a completely different culture in your business.
I think it's quite interesting when we talk about that I always talk about, the difference between a mentor and a manager, and how you can sort of use what a mentor can do as a manager to help create a better working environment and create a better delivery mechanism. Because if people feel that their dreams, their aspirations, their motivations have been tapped into, and you understand that as a manager and you understand how to lock those sort of things, then it's really sort of becomes a better place, because people feel empowered to actually try things and deliver things. And I think the big thing that I always find that a lot of managers try to create is almost an inverted commas mini me, and they try to sort of create that mini person of them, where a mentor is not trying to do that. A mentor is trying to get that person to grow and expand their capabilities. And I think as a manager, if you took that armory rather than trying to create a mini me, that you're trying to get the person to be the best they can be, and that is truly understanding what their dreams and what their motivations are, what their aspirations are. And sometimes you can ask the flat question and say what motivates you, etc., and you get the usual questions, answers back, oh, I'm motivated by money and I'm motivated by success. But what I did found as a mentor, when you start to dig below those surface aspirations of people, you get to find the true things that absolutely drive that person. You get to find the true ambitions of that person. And then once you get that, that's how you start to truly motivate people and change people, because you can really tap into their inner self, their inner drive. And I think that's the big thing that I found from both a management point of view and from a mentor's point of view, that once I understood that and I started to tap into that, I could really motivate people. And that meant understanding my people on an individual level and spending some time to really understand them. And again, trust as a manager is really important, and trust as a mentor is even more important. But if you take that trust and grow trust, then all of a sudden it changes the way that teams work. And I've had people as a manager tell me some very, very personal things, and they've never gone any further. And people have always come back to me time and time again. I'm still mentoring people now that I managed probably 5, 6, 10 years ago, because they come back to me time and time again because they trust. There's a certain person that I've managed 15, 20 years ago, and still rings me up for advice on various different things. And that was because I managed her, but I managed her as a mentor, not as a manager. And I think if you can get that balance right, it's really important. And I think that sort of leads into that next question that we sort of wrote and people have sort of come to us about, was what makes, or what are the good qualities of a really good manager?
Well, in terms of a manager versus a mentor, I think there is a difference, a very big difference. Um, and I think, as a great manager, you're looking to be, I used the word a moment ago, inspirational. I mean, we've spent a lot of time over the last 12 weeks, Howard, haven't we, talking about during tough times how being inspirational is so important because, we as managers, as leaders, have our own doubts, have our own confidence crises, our own concerns. We worry a lot. If you own your own business and you haven't been worried over the last 12 weeks, well, you're either an extremely fortunate person or you're rather lacking in certain qualities. I think everybody's been worried. But the truth is you can't express those worries when you manage people. You have to put on, if you like, a bit of an act. You have to remain strong. You have to have vision. You have to share that vision. You have to get people to believe in you, believe in where the company is going, even though there's no necessary evidence to suggest you're going to get there. You have to literally exude that aura of confidence. The fact is, you're giving people a sense of security, a sense of safety. We're going to be fine. We're going to get there. It's going to be brilliant. And you have to constantly be giving out positive energy, positive messaging, positive communication. Even when you as the leader, you as the manager have doubts yourself, you can't express those. And I think managing is all about that. It's all about the art of the possible, and really being strong when everybody around you is feeling fragile. That's a great leader. And we can all point to people in history who were very confident that, they were going to get there. I don't know if anybody else watched it, but on Sunday, if you're a football fan, they showed the whole of the 1966 World Cup final, which unfortunately or fortunately I remember because I was 9 in 1966. One of the things that the players said was that Alf Ramsey, the manager, Sir Alf Ramsey, had said to them for 4 years prior to the World Cup, we are going to win the World Cup. We're going to win it. It's going to happen and we're preparing for it. It will happen. And he was so confident that it was going to happen. It came as no surprise to the guys that won it that they'd managed it. Now, frankly, we were a very poor international team prior to that point, prior to 66. But he had that belief and he passed on that belief to people. And I think as managers, we have to do the same. Mentoring is very different, as we've been saying. It's very much about encouraging people, empowering people. And one of the things that we haven't said, but I think it's something worth mentioning here, is that, when we manage people in a business, you're trying to get them to perform to certain standards. So, we know in our industry, it's about that dreadful expression KPIs, but it is about setting targets. It's about performance goals, managing those goals, managing the objectives, and so forth. Mentoring is not like that. Mentoring is different. And you can expect that everybody that you mentor will, to a lesser or greater extent, have baggage, because we've all got baggage. Everybody has baggage. You expect it, and you understand it, and you empathize with it. And your ability as a mentor is to get people to stretch, as Howard said, to be the best, as the cliche goes, that they can be. Now, I've mentored a huge amount of people over the years. And part of my job, I think, when I mentor people, is to get the mentee to believe in themselves, to recognize that they can stretch their ambitions, they can stretch their goals, they can perform to a higher level than they give themselves credit for, that they have a level of esteem that perhaps they hadn't realized. And I think your job is to get them to do that. It's not about accepting their targets and goals. Very often in my experience, people will lowball their goals. They'll talk about where they think they can get, whereas I think great mentors encourage people to rise above their preset goals. And your joy in being a mentor is to see them grow beyond what they thought they could do, get beyond the point of proficiency that they felt they could only get to. And your influence in enabling them to get beyond that point in whatever they're doing, whether it's rising through the ranks to be a manager or even a director or even owning their own business, or rising to the point of being a great consultant or a great administrator, the best they could be in those positions, that's fine. It's what they want to be. And as Howard said earlier, you're not providing or hoping they're going to be a mini you. It's not about that. It's not about replicating you, duplicating your personality, your abilities and your achievements. It's getting them to be the best they can be and whatever they want to be. And I think that's a very big difference between management and mentoring. Mentoring is much more psychological. It's getting people to really push themselves, to help themselves to develop, rather than you telling them to do so.
I think it's quite interesting, sort of the way you frame that. I always look at it from a mentor, and what makes a good mentor is someone who's got that ability to listen, but it's not listening in the way that a manager listens. Because I think what a manager listens to do, the manager listens to the things that are going well and how they can act on those and make them do them better. I think what a really good mentor does is they look at what's holding people back, and they understand that there are lots of things in people's private life, work life, etc., that holds them back, and whatever it be. And if you can find what that is, and what general people do is they create pillars that emphasize their inner belief. So their inner belief is holding back and holding back and holding back, etc. And there's lots of things that when you start to speak to a true mentor, they can start to see those inner beliefs. They start to understand what they are, and then they can start to understand what blockers that the mentee is putting in place to actually stop those things from happening. So they're very good at deconstructing the belief system of somebody and then rebuilding it again in a more positive light, so you can see how it goes forward. And that is about inspiring the person that they can do it, rather than just telling people how to do it. And there's a very big difference between telling someone how to do it and then trying to motivate them to do it, than actually releasing someone's blockers and things that are holding them back, and then inspiring them to deliver, because that delivery then becomes so much more powerful. And so a good mentor will have a plan and will understand what plan they're going to do. They're going to understand that they will hear things that will be quite direct sometimes from a mentee. They will hear things that are quite painful from a mentee, and they'll sometimes hear things about a company that they maybe not want to hear, because they are part of that company in certain cases, or they're external and they're giving, your client's company maybe a bad time, and maybe sometimes that's deserved. But it's then having the capabilities of putting that to one side, readdressing it in a way that benefits the mentee rather than the company, and working for that. So it is really having that sort of understanding from there. So having knowledge and confidence to build someone else's confidence is important, and it's building that trust within that person. So energizing and inspiring people is really important, but then linking that into the company's goals and the company's aspirations is the art of what a true mentor can do. So if I can get someone on a personal level to create a better person of themselves that then benefits their client, their employer, then all of a sudden we are starting to really creating an atmosphere within a company that can really build teams that become super teams, powerful teams.
So Howard, come back to the point about mentoring and / teaching. So to give you a perfect example of outstanding mentoring, when I was just about, I think, 2 years into being the managing director as CEO of Office Angels, and at that point I was building a much bigger business. We were moving towards opening or having 120 offices around the country, and eventually 650 staff. I mean, this was all new to me. I'd worked my way up to that role right back from the early days of starting as a junior interviewer. I'd worked my way through the ranks, and now here I was running a very, very large business, nearly 200 million pounds worth of turnover eventually, and doing a job that I'd never done before. Huge amount of responsibility, a massive amount of stress. And we had a very forward-thinking HR director who came in and said, "How do you fancy having a mentor?" Well, I didn't even know what the word meant. I had to look it up in the dictionary. And she said, "Look, we're bringing somebody from the outside in. You can say anything you like to this person, hugely experienced executive. and you'll have a conversation every month for an hour, a couple of hours, and she'll help guide you. And I thought, well, why not? And I started working with this lady who was absolutely brilliant. What she did was really clever. She'd sit and ask me questions about how I was feeling about what was going on in the business. And naturally, because she was very good at getting me to open up, I'd start expressing my worries or concerns or talk about the dilemmas I was facing. And she never gave me any answers. She never said, do this, do this, do this. She said, what do you think you should do? How do you think you could cope with this particular situation? What thoughts have you got? It's always open questions. And so, of course, I would give her my answers. Sometimes I'd thought about the answers. Sometimes I made them up as I went along, but I gave answers and she'd look at me, very good body language. Her eyes were kept looking into mine, so to speak. Her body language was very intense. She was watching me, showing empathy, and she'd listen. And sometimes she'd say, that's a brilliant idea. I think that's exactly what you should do. It's what I would do, which just gave me enormous confidence coming from such an experienced person. She never said, ever, that's a rubbish idea. That's awful. She would always say, you could do that. You might also want to think about doing this as well. So she would kind of prompt me very cleverly with some other thoughts. Naturally, brilliant ideas, much better ideas than my own. Of course, I'd claim them as my own later on, but I mean, she was just fantastic at doing that. And I think if I was to analyze what she did for me, she gave me confidence. I would think 90% of the time when she probed and asked me questions about my solutions, I had the solutions. I knew what to do. What I didn't have was the experience. So I didn't know that the solutions I had were the right solutions. She gave me the confidence to recognize they were good solutions based upon her own experience. And so that gave me enormous confidence. If she thought they were great ideas, then sure as hell I thought they were good ideas. So I would press on from that. And she made me feel safe. I worked in a highly politicized environment. There were brilliant people around me with lots of experience, but this word trust is an important one. I knew, even though I was great friends with lots of people at my peer group level, that I could talk to people and they would understand my situation or situations because they were similar to their own, but I didn't trust them to keep quiet about our conversations. I knew some of them would use those conversations to tell other people, and I just couldn't allow myself to do that. But I could speak to her, and I knew, would never utter a word to anybody. And that, for my confidence, was absolutely wonderful. And when I set up my own business and was thinking about being a consultant, a business coach, a mentor, I went to see her. And in fact, at the point, I was thinking about asking her for a job. And she said to me, again, she was very clever. She said, why do you want to work for me? If you want a job, I'll happily give you one. But I think you'd be great on your own. I think you'd make a brilliant business. And that was what I was thinking. She knew what I was thinking, and she gave me that confidence to strike up and move on. She was hugely inspirational to me. And I think I've taken from her those techniques and used them in my own way. And I think that as a mentor is what we have to do with our people. We have to empower them, give them confidence, allow them to make their own decisions, but with very subtle guidance from us. Some of it is also to do with following through. If you're going to have these conversations, the next month you meet them. And by the way, we haven't said this, but you need to have monthly sessions. And I mentioned earlier, an hour and a half is not unusual, an hour and a half, no interruptions. And allow people to talk about what they've done. You must make notes in these conversations because you're going to need to refer back to them. And whilst you're not telling people what to do, you are following up the month after. Or I wanted to ask you, you mentioned last month that this was such and such an issue. We talked about this. You said you were going to do X, Y, and Z. How did it go? So it is important to constantly go back and ask questions.
I think that sort of leads us on to the sort of next part there, Paul, which is all about the accountability of the mentor. And obviously the mentor is being engaged by a company more often than not to develop either the leadership of the company or the number ones below that leadership team to create the succession plan coming through and really find and create an environment where people can really sort of blossom and grow. So being held accountable is really important. And it's interesting, sort of on an accountability front, is I always found that being held accountable to the person that I am working with, that they deliver back on the things that we've discussed, is really important. And I think it's having that period of time, and it comes over a period of time where, first of all, trust is something that you have to gain, and accountability is about allowing that person to make mistakes and not really hanging them out to dry because of that, but cajoling them and creating that environment where they can actually move forward. And then after a period of time, they then start to feel that they can push themselves outside of their comfort zone. And I think the accountability is taking that person from where they are and pushing them beyond a comfort zone that enables them to add more benefit to their own personal well-being and the well-being of the company that they're actually working for. And that is the accountability, I think, from a mentor's point of view, that we should be demonstrating, that, you know, it's a challenge to create somebody to shed the shackles of their comfort zone and really step above that, but step above it where they feel that they have the internal power and the internal belief system that they can actually then achieve what they're going to achieve. But then if something goes wrong, that they have the accountability that they have to come back and speak to the mentor and get the mentor to try readdress that and re-help that. And I think that's what I found as a mentor I was doing an awful lot, was helping people create their better version of themselves and drive that person further forward. And that has deadlines and timelines and actions to achieve. And I think from a point of view, you said there about making notes as a mentor is really important, because you've got to go back constantly and look at what you've achieved and why you've achieved. And sometimes what a mentee doesn't see is point A when you were introduced to them to point Z when you're leaving them, what a difference you've made along their journey and how they've changed. And going back sometimes and helping people to see where they've come from to where they've gone is all about that accountability. Yes, we're accountability to the paymaster of the company that's paying us to become and develop these people, but really our accountability as a mentor is to the people and driving the people forward.
And Howard, I think one of the things when you talk about being accountable, when you're holding people to account, is that as a mentor, you can challenge people. You know, you're not there to agree with everything they say. I'm often in that position where I disagree with what's being said to me. And you know, you have to be subtle. It's not a question of arguing with somebody, but you can certainly challenge an individual and challenge their views. You can constructively criticize. And I emphasize the word constructive. You can be honest with people, express your views. You know, if they trust you and they like you, and those two things are generally linked, they will listen. And part of what people get out of this is the fact that, you know, you are being open and honest with them. I don't think anybody I've ever mentored wanted or expected me to agree with everything they said. I think they actually want me to disagree in lots of instances. They want me to challenge them, to provoke them potentially. I also think it's about setting meaningful, collaborative goals, shall we say. You need to push and provoke them, but do it nicely. And I think it's about, as we said a moment ago, getting them to stretch. Now, part of all this is, and we didn't say this, but we should make this point. When you start mentoring somebody, you set the ground rules. Right at the very beginning, in the very first conversation, the very first conversation I ever have with people is how we're going to structure this situation going forward. And I always say to people that you're in a safe place. You can say to me whatever you want. It won't leave me. If you want me to speak to other people, you have to tell me to do that. If I feel that I want to pass something on to somebody, I will ask your permission. And if you say no, I will not pass on that information. That we need to be honest and open with each other, and so forth. And you set those parameters from the very first time you sit down with somebody, and you repeat that as a mantra every time you have a conversation. And as I said at the beginning, if you say that, you better mean it, because walking out of that room and repeating any of the conversations you've had without the permission of your mentee is an absolute abuse of that relationship. You cannot do it. So I think people have to feel safe and secure in your company and acknowledge that you are there as a guardian, as a mentor. Look it up in the dictionary, look up what mentor means. It does mean being a guardian. It does mean, in a sense, wrapping your arms around that person and taking care of them to the absolute best of your ability. And I said already that you have to be authentic, because clearly anybody can see if it's just make-believe. You have to believe in that person and believe in the actual facility of a mentoring session. And I think setting that scene is very important. Very often, by the way, and I'm sure Howard's the same, and he mentioned it, in between the mentoring meetings I have, people call me or I call them, and they're quick, short, sharp conversations very often. They'll reach out to us, ask us questions. They'll probably update us about what's going on in a particular situation. They'll look for often affirmation that they're doing the right things. Sometimes they'll look for additional support or techniques. So it's an ongoing thing. It is absolutely an hour and a half with an individual every month, but there is interaction in between that is often just short, sharp, 10, 15-minute conversations, and that's fine. And you need to be available to do that. And you can only do that if you want to do it. It can't feel like that you're being pressed upon to do it. And if you are going to get people to open up and share their innermost concerns and fears, and invest in the relationship with you, you've got to make yourself available to them. What's really sorry, just one last point. What's really interesting is when I've encouraged younger people, less experienced people, to be mentors in a business with other people in an organization, which happens all of the time, by the way, it really draws something out of those people too. They really, in giving of themselves, they end up building their own self-confidence and building their own knowledge base and self-esteem. Sorry, Howard.
I was going to say, most teams and good teams don't just have a manager and a coach or a trainer, or if you look at football terms, you've got the manager of the team and the captain on the field type scenario. From there, they have lots of people mentoring, and they have the senior pros mentoring the junior pros. They have senior people in the club mentoring the senior people in the team, and so there's lots of mentoring going on that create these really good, strong teams. And you find the best teams tend to have that really open, honest environment where they can say things to each other and they feel that what they're saying has benefit to the business. And it's the same when you're mentoring. It's about driving that. And I think sometimes what you said there, Paul, about being a mentor, being available, and sometimes you're not available. And I think sometimes I've worked with staff and worked with people as a mentor, and I've got them to the point where I think most people inside them know what they truly need to do. They just have that fear of stepping out of their comfort zone and actually doing it, because they fear that if they did that, if something went wrong, how would it look, etc. So some of the times what I get my mentees to do is to create a mentor for themselves and pick a mentor for themselves. And I get them to pick anybody. And it's quite interesting. I've had people being mentored by, and this is a true story, I've had people being mentored by Britney Spears. I've had people being mentored by Winston Churchill, by Genghis Khan, etc., etc. Because what they're saying to themselves is on the inside. They're asking themselves an inside. I'm saying, if you trusted Britney Spears, what would she say? And she'd say, go do it, girl. And I say, so why aren't you going to do it? And all of a sudden you start to listen to what your inner voice is actually saying to you. And it's creating that conduit that says, I can do anything. I just have to believe in myself. Someone might be inside me telling me how to do this, or my mentor might be telling me how to do this, but I've got to do that. So sometimes as a mentor, I will create a mentor for the person themselves, that may be someone that's not even alive, but it's someone that they respect and think if I asked the question, they would give me the right answer, and therefore I would do that. And it's just getting that person to believe their own self-worth, because that question is coming from internal and being answered internally, can they then go out and deliver that externally? And that's the art of a mentor. And that's the bit about accountability, celebrating success, is getting that inner drive and that inner commitment to come out. So although that sounds a very sort of strange thing from a mentor's point of view, okay, it works extremely well for a mentee, because you have that voice reverberating around your head on the inside. And I think that lead.
Howard, just one before you move on to the next question, I just want to raise a point. You've sort of pick up on a point that you've covered off, and you know what we've got to do as mentors is use our active listening abilities, our emotional intelligence. So I'm going to flick through a few things here very quickly. So lots of open questions. You guys know how to ask open how, what, which, why, where, when questions. Every question is an open question, no closed questions. Lots of funneling questions. So the open questions, you listen actively, you ask the next open question, and so on and so on. You're demonstrating your emotional intelligence, empathy, your sensitivity, your openness. It's really important, and Howard's making this point. Explore their emotions, their fears, their suppressors. What's holding them back? What's keeping them from achieving what they want to achieve? Your job, frankly, is to shut up and listen. Ask more and more open questions. Listen. Help them, as I suggested, by figuring out the answers to their own questions. Don't immediately give them the answers. Get them to dig deep into their own psyche, their own thoughts, and come up with the answers. Encourage that. Listen not just to their words, by the way, but pay attention to their non-verbal behavior as well. So when you're sitting with them, body language is very important. When you ask questions, watch them carefully, watch how they react physically to what you're talking to them about. That's very important. The tone of voice, their speech pattern, and yours too. If you want to get people to open up, then it's important to think about your tone of voice, the surroundings, and getting people to draw in. Your body language becomes important. And it's really about that. It's listening to them. So I just wanted to, Howard, just to cover that point, those points off in terms of how you draw information out, how you use your body language, how you watch theirs, your tone of voice, their tone of voice, getting them to figure out the answers without you immediately jumping in with the solutions. Those things are really important, because if they come up with their own answers, as I said earlier, and you encourage them to then take those answers forward, empower them, they will feel it's their achievement, it's not down to you, it's down to them. And that is significant. It's important. It's also the difference between managing people and mentoring. It has to be down to them.
I think that sort of leads to the last point that we wanted to sort of really touch on, which was all about, we often get asked, you know, why bring a mentor in? What is the difference between mentor and management, and what does that do? How does a mentor create team spirit, and how does a mentor really develop the business internally? And both you and I, Paul, have worked with companies where we've been in as a true mentor, and we've seen the change in maybe toxic atmospheres to positive atmospheres, etc., by working with both management and the management team and the owners of the business to create something very, very different. And, you know, as I put on here on the slide, you know, team spirit, you know, to me, it's all about a mentor coming into a business and helping the boat go faster. Everybody's in the boat, and it's the mentor's job and the manager's job. And this is where it becomes a joint collaboration between both parties to actually make sure the boat is going faster and everyone was pulling in the same direction. And sometimes, although a mentor won't discuss what is private and confidential between the mentor and the mentee, they can bring out ideas and help the management team of a company develop better, because they have a better inner knowledge and understanding of what the people below that are feeling, and how they're inverted commas being put upon by their management, and how they can change the manager's understanding of a business. So the mentor goes both ways when they're engaged by a business. If they're not working with the owners of the business and they're working further down the line, they can really help the manager and the owners of the business shape teams and create a different team spirit and a different culture. And that culture then becomes part and parcel of the business. And if you look at all prominent, successful teams, whether it be a business team, a sporting team, etc., it is all based on a culture. And it's all based on a culture that is derived by management and mentoring combined, not just by one or the other.
So Howard, I mean, I think, we wanted to talk about mentoring today predominantly because obviously people are going to start coming back to work fairly soon if they're not already back at work. And as managers and as leaders, we need to get them mentally fit back for work again, getting close to them, and mentoring forms part of that program of getting people back into the workplace. And that one-on-one interaction with staff, with your colleagues, is critical at the moment. We know that, especially people that have been furloughed, who have been out of the workplace for a period of time. Now, our opinion is that mentoring isn't just for this period of time, getting people back into the workplace, getting them ready to go. It's for good. It's forever. And as Howard says, it forms part of the integral element of your culture, your team spirit going forward. And how you engage with people presently is going to be very important to getting your business back up and running real fast in the near future, in the next, we hope, 3-4 weeks. And, you'll be able to uncover whether there are people who are ready to return, eager to get on with it, and those people, frankly, who don't want to return to work and are at this moment wondering whether they want to be in recruitment, or wondering whether they want a change of career, or have simply they've lost their, to use the expression, mojo. They've just lost the drive. And, you guys need to get close to people to understand that. We've talked about the fact that we're entering a period now which will be recessionary. Not for long, we hope. We expect to see it come back very quickly next year, if not towards the back end of this year. But we know that it's going to be tough. We need people that are up for the challenge. You guys that manage businesses will be looking carefully at your staff and wondering who's up for it, who's going to get in the trenches with you, who's going to work hard, jump over the trench when you blow the whistle, ready to go at the enemy. And it's all very bad analogies on my part, but you know where I'm coming from. And there'll be people that aren't up for it and don't want to do it. One of the ways you'll figure that out is to get close to them through mentoring. It's not necessarily through management. You need to understand their drivers, their fears, their concerns. And some people that are feeling low and lacking in confidence, with good quality mentoring, can be brought out of their shells, can be brought back into the workplace, and will perform very well. And there will be others, when you mentor them, you will realize, and they will realize, are not up for it, don't want to do it, and aren't going to be a part of your business going forward. You need to get into this now, but as we get beyond this point and we get back to normal, whatever normal will look like, mentoring, I think, forms a very large part of, as Howard has correctly described, the culture, if you like, the family feel of your business. And there's another question that you need to ask yourselves. If you're mentoring other people, who is mentoring you? All of us need people that we can lean into and talk to in confidence about the way we feel, about our fears, our trepidations. That you guys, if you haven't got mentors, you need one. We all need one. I mentioned earlier, when I was running a very large business, I needed a mentor. I didn't know I needed one. I needed somebody to point me in that direction. But boy, was I glad I had somebody. And I've always had people I can talk to and confide in ever since. That's not a weakness. It's a strength. It's a strength to be able to share your thoughts, your innermost concerns with others. But those people that you share with, you have to trust. And you have to acknowledge that their experience and their direction is worth listening to and worth considering. When you have a mentor, when you have somebody in your corner, a guardian looking after you, it makes a massive difference to your psyche. And I think that, as Howard has said, what we're advocating here isn't something that we are suggesting you do for the short term because of the crisis, but something you embed in your business, not just for the short term, but for the long term.
I think to give a sort of an ending sort of story on this, and I think Jim might enjoy this story. about combining management and mentoring together. So I was speaking yesterday to Phil Davis, ex-Welsh Rugby Union, British Lion, etc. And I'm working with him on a project at the moment. And we were talking about him coaching Namibia, of all teams, and getting them to the World Cup in Japan. And I talked about, I was interested on how he did that and what he did to change Namibia's view of rugby. And he set out a very strict criteria of the type of people he wanted within his team. And that wasn't always necessary about the best players. And they signed a contract of this is the things that we're going to do from a behavioral point of view, from a training point of view, from a social aspect point of view. And he covered lots and lots of different things within these type of thing, within this area. And he said, and the big difference that we did, we brought in mentors. We brought in mentors to talk to these athletes and talk to these people about how they could get an extra 1%, an extra 2% out of their game. And he was talking about the time that they were thinking about competing against, you know, one week they'd be competing against Georgia, a very sort of unknown rugby team. And then the following week they were playing the All Blacks. And they were talking about their belief system in, we're going to play the All Blacks, it's going to be 100 points. And he said the mentors came in and gave the belief system a very different view because it took away all the hidden fears that these people had. And yes, they got beat by the All Blacks. He said, but the performance was so different. And the performance and the way they challenged everything was different. And he said, so it was a case of management and mentoring working very, very hand in glove to develop something. And they became a top 20 team in the world. And for a country as small as Namibia, with a very small rugby playing population, he said the difference wasn't in the coaching and the development of the players, it was in the mentoring of their mindset to deliver and deliver more. And I think if we take that from a recruitment point of view, we all have teams, and it's about developing individuals. And as Paul said, getting those individuals to perform to the best of their ability, and then you as managers performing to the best of your ability. And he said he had mentors on that program to do that.
I think we've reached the end, unfortunately, Howard.
I think we have.
Go so fast. It's unbelievable. We've got another packed hour next Tuesday at 11 a.m. Howard, you and I will be putting out some messages around the content for next week.
We are. We talk very much about, and before we disappear, if anyone's got any questions, feel free to fire some questions over. I hope we've answered quite a lot of the questions with there. There were some very poignant questions that maybe we will come back to people on an individual basis and answer that. But we talk about next week, and what we were talking about is we're talking about relaunch or restart. And we're talking about, is there an opportunity now to really transform our culture, to really take our culture to the next level? And so next week, we're going to be talking about relaunch or restart our businesses and what the difference actually means and how we can take the businesses forward. So if anyone hasn't, it looks like no one's got any questions, which is good. So what I'd like to say is thank you very much to everybody. It's been a pleasure again, as always. We look forward to seeing you next week. This week is week 12, next week's week 13, so let's hope it's not unlucky. Again, we've had a large attendance to these webinars, so please book early. And I say, if you've got any questions that you want to ask us in between now and next week, feel free to give us a call anytime. Paul, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you, everybody.
See you later.
Take care, everybody. Bye now.